I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm going back to my parents' house." When I shouted this at the end of my patience, my mother-in-law who lived with me said, "Then take your 2 kids with you and divorce my son too." She grabbed my 3 and 5-year-old children's clothes roughly and pushed them toward me. The 2 children were so terrified that they did not even cry. They looked at my mother-in-law with frightened eyes while I held them in my arms. My mother-in-law, as if to say, "I'm so relieved," she was looking down at us. I had never thought that there was such a terrible mother-in-law in the world before I got married, not knowing that she would regret it later. She kicked us out. My name is Marie. I am a 36-year-old housewife. I met my husband Josh, who is 3 years younger than me, at a company social gathering. I had never dated anyone younger than me before, so Josh was not in my romantic interest. I guess I liked his nonchalant attitude. He was very aggressive in his appeal to me. After 1 year of dating, he proposed to me. When I said yes, Josh said, "Actually, I want you to move in with me when we get married," he said. "I'm worried about my mother being alone at home." Josh's father had already passed away, and Josh had no brothers or sisters. I was so moved by Josh's family-oriented attitude. I thought he would take good care of me, his wife. I agreed to live with Josh. Before our marriage, I went to Josh's parents' house to say hello. Josh's mother was a very quiet person, and I had no idea what she was thinking. I was relieved that she did not seem to be a rude person. However, after the wedding and the registration of the marriage, and when we started to live together, my mother-in-law's prejudice against her son gradually became clear. "That's right, the wife is 29 years old. She was in a hurry to get married, wasn't she?" Josh was fooled, too, because he told me so. He said he didn't mean it. My mother-in-law didn't even know I was listening. She was calling a friend or a relative. I wanted to go out and deny it, but it seemed to be getting more and more cruel, so I held my anger and kept quiet. My parents have always been very strict. If you're going to live with them, you must serve your husband and mother-in-law well. Young people these days get divorced so easily. I will not tolerate that kind of thing. My mother also told me, "Don't come home often and take advantage of us." My mother told me and watched me go away. My mother said that from her mother-in-law's point of view, I thought it might be the same for my mother-in-law, so I thought that might really be true. If you endure it, someday you'll laugh about it. My mother said it as if it was from a song lyric. Then I was sent off, so I thought that if I got married, I would not think of leaving easily. And I decided to protect my family. To do so, I thought it was important to be financially stable. I continued to work after marriage. But my mother-in-law, "Stop it! You're making it look like my Josh doesn't make enough money." And she would say to me every time I came home from work, even when I was tired, that, "You decided on your own, okay? So I want you to do your job as a housewife too." She says to prepare dinner and clean up afterwards. "You vacuum the house every day when you're a housewife. You should also clean the bathroom and toilet every day." I was made to work late into the night cleaning the house. Even when I looked exhausted and worn out, even Josh would told me, "You're going to quit after the baby is born anyway. Why don't you just quit now?" That's what he said. I want to work even after I have a baby. More than that, I told him that I wanted him to do something about my mother-in-law. "Well, my mother has always been like that, so there's no way she would listen to me even if I told her." He said this as if it was someone else's problem. At first, I thought that my mother-in-law was a quiet person because she did not talk. I was so wrong. She was the type of person who reveals her true nature as soon as you become related. Even so, I stubbornly continued to work. After a year, my mother-in-law told me, "It's about time you had a baby," she said. "Isn't it because you are working that you can't have a child yet? Infertility rate increases when you reach 30 years old. I already had Josh when I was 25. She started to sarcastically say these things, when I ignored her, as I should have. "He didn't have to marry someone this old. He could have had a younger one." She said that and walked away. getting on my nerves. Not long after that, I became pregnant. I was relieved to know that I would no longer have to deal with her sarcasm anymore. See, I told you so. You're too late to get pregnant at 30. It's your own fault. You should take care of the housework. She never took over the housework for me. I had no choice but to give up my job and stay home. But my mother-in-law was still not pleased. Oh, you have been working until now, when after all you're going to quit anyway. If that was the case, why didn't you quit early? And she would say things to despise me. In the end, I realized that no matter what I did, she wouldn't like it. I tried to stay out of her sight as much as possible. I had to make an effort not to see her in the house. To be honest, I wanted to have a home birth. But when I mentioned it to my mother-in-law, she said, "It's going home to your parents after all, isn't it? You still think of yourself as a child, don't you? Your parents are pathetic." She even insulted my parents. I was so frustrated and disappointed that I decided to give birth at home. However, when I talked to Josh and expressed my concern that I didn't know if I would be able to do the housework,
"You're a stay-at-home mom. You can do it." "Oh, well, my mom will take care of it. Just don't put that burden on me."
he directly told me so. At the time, Josh was in a management position. He seemed to be very busy, even from the side. I had been in that management position myself. I could understand how Josh felt. However, he had originally asked me to move in with him, and with that he did not follow up with any support for me. He left my mother-in-law, who was unattentive to me. I was gradually losing heart. However, at this stage, I still thought that I was still a happy person, because my life after the birth of my child was hellish. I gave birth to a baby boy, and he was very, very cute. But my mother-in-law didn't even hold him in her arms, and if he cried at night, she would say, "He's too noisy. Put him to bed soon." She would yell at me like that. I was so upset because I was raising a child for the first time. I was going out of my mind because of her hysterical yelling. When I was upset, the baby was anxious too. The crying did not stop, and the vicious cycle continued day after day. I never expected that my mother-in-law, who had experienced child rearing, wouldn't be such a good friend. I began to feel even more disgusted with my mother-in-law. Josh wouldn't take over childcare for me, and when the baby cried in the middle of the night, rather, he did the same thing as my mother-in-law.
Hey, why don't you take him somewhere else? I have to work early in the morning,"
he would say in a disgusted voice. I had no choice but to take the baby outside for a walk and return home some nights. So I was sleep deprived all the time, and I wondered when I would ever get a proper sleep. Day after day I was exhausted, doing housework and taking care of my child. My mother-in-law did not help me. When the baby cried during the daytime, she would say, "Gosh, it's too noisy, so I'm going out." So she started to go out. The superintendent of the condominium once said, "I heard that your mother-in-law is addicted to casino these days. There are really some people who get addicted to casino when they get old." I have been told that. I wondered if the noise of a casino was not louder than the sound of a baby's crying. I had a very mixed feeling about it. However, I was relieved that my mother-in-law was gone from the house. I didn't say anything in particular because I was kinda relieved. However, my mother-in-law became too much into it and started to go out from morning till night. "Marie, can you give me some allowance? I have a lot of things to do this month." She started asking me for some money. My mother-in-law is supposedly receiving a survivor's pension. She never paid any living expenses to our house and kept all her money on her own. I thought she was obviously spending it in the casino. And because I didn't want my mother-in-law to stay at home, so I started to give her money. And thanks to this, our family budget, which I had managed to make ends meet, went crazy every month. But then I thought it was better than putting myself under stress, so I closed my eyes to the situation. Then Josh came to me.
"Your bank book balance is going down. What are you spending it on?"
I told him about my mother-in-law. When I told him about her, Josh did not blame his mother.
"What are you thinking? You have to stop that kind of thing."
He scolded me instead. "She's your mother. I was hoping you'd tell her yourself."
"I didn't think you were such an unreliable woman. I was a fool to trust you with the family finances."
He spat the blame on me.
Anyway, don't ever give my mother any more money.
He gave me the order not to give her any more money. Then, when my mother-in-law asked me for pocket money as usual, Josh told me not to give you any more money. When I rejected her, my mother-in-law looked at me with disbelief. It's a wife's job to make it work, right? You're supposed to take good care of your old ones. You're so useless. She was furious and went out of the house again. After that, I was asked for money several times, but when I mentioned Josh's name, she reluctantly gave up. I hate cheapskate wives. Who do you even think you are? She told me in a sarcastic tone and left. After a while, the urging stopped, but she continued to play in the casino. I don't know how my mother-in-law was managing her money. At that time, I was pregnant with my second child. I was so busy raising my child with my pregnant body that I didn't see what was going on around me. That was all I could think about. It was the same after I gave birth to my second child. My mother-in-law was still bullying me, and it was getting worse and worse. I was so preoccupied with making the baby grow up that I could not afford to worry about it. Furthermore, when my younger daughter turned 2 years old, I was able to get a new job, which I had longed for. I spent less and less time at home. I spent less and less time with my mother-in-law. A year passed by before I realized it. Josh started coming home later and later. I wondered if it was my imagination, but I felt that he was absent-minded more and more often. My younger son, now 3 years old, began to take to his father. Whenever he tried to go out alone on his days off, I want to go with you. No amount of coaxing by me would stop him. I asked Josh if he could take his son with him. I pleaded.
No, it's not a place for children.
And then, with an unclear attitude, he goes off on his own to escape. When my daughter, who was sad, persistently made a fuss, my mother-in-law, who was at home, said to her, Shut up! Make her be quiet! She scolded them hysterically. My 2 children were frightened by my mother-in-law and did not take to her at all. After many times of this, I finally ran out of patience. After Josh had left, I told my mother-in-law, who was scolding my daughter. I finally yelled at her, Shut up! Shut up! You're the one being noisy. I finally yelled at her. And more likely, it's your son's fault. You tell someone else's kid to listen, but you never mind your own son. I kept yelling like a madman. My mother-in-law, who had never been resisted by me before, looked at me dumbfounded. And then I finally said it. I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm going back to my parents' house. I said it out loud. Then my mother-in-law said, Then take those 2 annoying kids with you and divorce my son. She roughly grabbed the clothes of my 3- and 5-year-old children and shoved them towards me. She then produced the divorce papers with Josh's name on them, which I don't know where she got them from. Take that with you. And she handed it to me. I felt uncomfortable with her readiness, but I was so mad that I thought it was a good idea. I wrote down my name and packed our bags to go to my parents' house. I then went to the city hall and filled the divorce papers. Then I went to my parents' house, and my mother, who had heard so much, she accepted me without a word. When I reported it to my father with dread, he said,
I see.
Just that.
Not, don't be naive, go back home.
I was relieved that he did not criticize me. 2 weeks later, I was at the door of my office after work. I found 37 calls to my phone. The caller was my ex-mother-in-law. She had been calling almost every 10 minutes since early afternoon. As I was going through the incoming call history, I found another call from my ex-mother-in-law. I tapped the incoming call icon inadvertently. Then my ex-mother-in-law's loud voice echoed around me, even though I didn't put the phone on speaker. Marie, why won't you answer the phone? I looked at the other employees. I hurriedly put my phone to my ear and said, I think you've got the wrong person, I said, and left the place. Several people glanced at me and looked at me curiously. How could I be mistaking you for someone else? I've been calling you all day long, but why don't you answer? As usual, my ex-mother-in-law was so self-centered that I was sick of talking to her. Isn't it natural because I'm at work? I mean, we are strangers now, aren't we? When I said that and tried to hang up, to my surprise, my ex-mother-in-law was standing right in front of me holding a smartphone. It seemed that she was waiting for me. My ex-mother-in-law trembled and hung up the phone. You! How dare you! You think you can do this? She took out an envelope with a Content Certified stamp and showed it to me. I popped my head in. What are you talking about? My ex-mother-in-law replied, Don't play dumb with me. It's your father, she screamed. I looked at the contents of the envelope that she handed me. It was a picture of Josh in a hotel room with a woman, and a picture of my ex-mother-in-law in a casino, and a detailed report of each of their activities. The casino clerk saying,
Oh, that old woman who's here every day. I remember her because she's here from morning till night. She always gets mad when she loses.
She's always losing money and getting mad, and there was also a letter testifying. And then, unexpectedly, there was a picture of my ex-mother-in-law receiving something that looked like money from Josh's cheating partner. It seemed that my father, who was the head of the credit agency, had been conducting his own investigation from the time when he became suspicious. At the bottom of that, in my father's own handwriting,
I will never forget the fact that you people hurt my daughter, so be prepared.
That was written. My father was angry. I was so moved to know that. In fact, I had been avoiding my father ever since I returned home. I was ashamed that I had come back to my father's house even though he had told me not to come back, so my father did not take the opportunity to talk to me. He must have sent the material to Josh and my ex-mother-in-law. I once again found the courage to fight, and when I glared at my ex-mother-in-law who was very mad, I said, What on earth did you receive from your cheating son's partner? I asked her. My ex-mother-in-law looked away. That's not important. More than that, tell your father. Tell him to destroy this document, she shouted in an obviously suspicious manner. My ex-mother-in-law, who has been playing in the casino from morning till night and keeps losing money. She must have no income other than the survivor's pension. Well, it seems that your son's cheating partner's name and address are all in here. All I have to do is ask her myself. As I said this while looking at the documents, my ex-mother-in-law started shaking and trembling. Oh, please, don't do that. You've already separated, so it's none of your business. Please, please, please. She bowed her head vigorously. I could feel the stares all around me. Anyway, I'll look into it some more. If you keep following me, I'll call security. I implored her to leave. My ex-mother-in-law bit her lip and left, quietly. I hurried back to my parents' house and jumped on my father's back, who was reading the newspaper in the living room. Dad, I'm sorry, and thank you. Then I suddenly lost my mind and started to cry like a child. My dad said,
Oh.
Then he patted me on the back as I sobbed.
I will take care of them. You don't have to do anything.
He patted me gently on the head.
I'm sorry you had to endure so much.
And I just nodded quietly. I couldn't stop crying, and before I knew it, I fell asleep. I think I must have been tired after a long, long time. The kids seemed to be washed by my mother. When I woke up, it was morning and I was on the couch with a blanket over me. Later, Josh's affair partner told me that she wanted to marry Josh. She gave the money to my casino-crazed ex-mother-in-law to bully me. She had asked her to get rid of his son's wife and children. If the affair was found out, she would only be charged alimony and might not be able to get married. My ex-mother-in-law was more grateful of a daughter-in-law who's giving her allowance. She may have also thought that she would not have to take care of her grandchildren. After that, Josh and his cheating partner remarried. The ex-mother-in-law was not what she thought she would be, and her new daughter-in-law started to bully her. There is no food for a useless person. And the wife's voice echoed through the neighborhood every night. The former mother-in-law had no place to stay at home. Eventually, she was kicked out. After that, the new wife got tired of Josh's cheap salary and moved all her savings to herself. She sold the family home and ran away and disappeared. Josh was lonely and looked for his mother. She was housed in a facility for elderly people with no relatives, and she had a hard time there. And as soon as she met Josh, she was like, "Oh my God!" She ran away screaming like that. "I don't want to go home! I don't want to go home! The devil is here!" She was clinging to a pillar, and he had a very hard time pulling her off. It was horrible to imagine how much his new wife had tormented her. I also felt that the resentment she must have felt toward his son, who had left her alone. She had lived her life according to my own desires, and having to pay the price of being bullied and tormented. I am so glad that I did not stay with Josh, who ignored my family. In the end, Josh rented a shabby apartment with what little money he had and started living alone. After work, he went to his night job and worked on weekends as well. He's managing to make ends meet while paying his alimony and child support. I can only say that he deserves what he gets. As for me, I am able to work hard at my company thanks to the cooperation of my parents in raising my children. Recently, I have been entrusted with important work. My children are also with my parents. They are very attached to them, especially my grandfather's lap, which was very popular, and we were always fighting over it. My father and mother were very strict with me, but when it came to their grandchildren, they seemed to have no pain in their eyes and loved them like crazy, unlike with me back then. But when I see my parents looking so happy, I am glad I became a mother. I feel happy to be a mother and to have been able to show filial piety to my parents. I forget the hellish day and will live happily.
Hey, say something. Anything. I know you hear me. My mother-in-law and husband, who seem completely oblivious to my voice, even though we are in the same living room.
Mom? Can you hear anything?
What?
I can't hear anything.
The two of them laughed hysterically. I held back tears as I packed my belongings and ran away from my in-law's house. My name is Iris, and I am 34 years old. Lately, I've been recognized for my achievement at work, and even praised by my boss. I'm in a really good mood. But just 2 years ago, I was living in hell. Back then, I was living with my husband, Vincent. I met him at a matchmaking party. We were the same age and could talk and get along just fine. I made a promise to meet again because our conversation flowed more naturally with any other man at the party. It seemed like he hadn't talked to any other woman at the party as much as he did with me.
I was nervous about going to those parties at first, but now I'm glad I went. I got to meet someone like you, Iris.
When he said that, I couldn't help but blush like a young girl. From then on, we dated for about 6 months, and then he proposed to me. I accepted his proposal. Both Vincent and I were being pressured by our parents about getting married, so we were both positive about it. And then, about 3 months after our wedding...
Sorry, Iris. I got really drunk after a party the other day. It seems like my wallet got stolen, and my card was used. My bank account is empty now. I can't afford our living expenses, so I was thinking of relying on my parents' help.
Vincent said that to me while kneeling down and begging. I was truly surprised by his confession. Indeed, a few days earlier, when I couldn't reach him after the drinking party, I went to look for him. I found him sitting and sleeping in a corner of a nearby alley. He must have had his wallet stolen before I found him. Suddenly? Living with your parents? How about I contribute more to our living expenses for a while? When I suggested that, Vincent shook his head.
Do you even know how much the mortgage is? There's no way you can afford it.
His words struck a chord with me. Perhaps Vincent doesn't know how much I earn, I thought. But before I could correct him about my income, an unbelievable statement came out of his mouth.
Besides, I've already talked to my mom about moving in, so you don't have to worry about anything.
Huh? You've already talked to her? I felt like I was losing consciousness. I'm not particularly close with my mother-in-law, and it all started with her attitude when Vincent first brought me home. When she asked about my alma mater and where my parents work, my mother-in-law let out a big sigh. What? He's chosen such an ordinary woman. My mother-in-law said it loudly as if she wanted me to hear. At that time, my husband was in the kitchen, so he probably didn't hear her voice. I was shocked to hear those words and froze in place. Furthermore, My mother-in-law acted as if she knew everything about me. I'll allow the marriage,
But don't drag Vincent down.
she said that with a harsh gaze. It seemed like my mother-in-law didn't want to accept me as her son's wife. Living with a mother-in-law like that, my spirit felt heavy. I don't think her personality would change even if we became a family. A few years before I met Vincent, I heard that my father-in-law couldn't bear living with my mother-in-law, and they got divorced. When I asked my husband about what happened, he just said,
It was probably some stupid fight.
he didn't seem to take their divorce too seriously. And shortly after we moved, my anxious feelings were proven right. When Vincent and I arrived at my in-laws' house with the movers, my mother-in-law said,
Vincent, welcome, honey. Now, go rest in the living room. I'll get some snacks and tea for you.
She welcomed my husband into the living room as if he were a little child.
Hey, can you do something about this baggage?
My mother-in-law said to me coldly from the entrance. I don't understand why she treats me so badly, but I reluctantly instructed the movers on what to do with the bags and unpacked everything myself.
Huh? You still haven't finished unpacking my bags? Normally, the wife unpacks the husband's bags first, right?
As I unpacked without taking a break, my husband said such a ridiculous thing. I became worried. If I continue like this from the very first day. But I decided to gather myself and not give up. Maybe it's because I accepted their words without saying anything that they feel free to make fun of me. I decided the next time they say something, I'll respond properly. But that decision might have been a mistake. It happened when I went to work and came back home. Since my husband's workplace is closer to my in-laws' house, Vincent comes home earlier than I do. When, who arrived home later than Vincent, was approached by my mother-in-law.
Hey, Iris, what do you think you're doing? Normally, you should have come home before your husband and prepared dinner.
My mother-in-law stood at the entrance scolding me. Am I not even allowed to take off my shoes and enter the house? I thought to myself that I had to say something to my mother-in-law this time. I work as a full-time employee, just like Vincent. Besides, my workplace is farther from his. So it's only natural that Vincent comes home earlier than me, even if it's the regular working hours. I try to calmly explain this to my mother-in-law, not letting my emotions get the best of me. Upon hearing my words, she turned red and went to the living room. I sighed and took off my shoes before entering the house. That's when it all started. Vincent and my mother-in-law began ignoring me. Initially to the extent that it seemed like they couldn't hear my voice. But when I spoke a bit louder, both of them reacted, and we could have important conversations. However, as this continued for more than a few months, even I, with my patience, realized that something was off. Could it be that they were purposely avoiding me? I asked Vincent about it when we were alone, and he gave me an exasperated look and responded,
That can't be true, right? You're just being paranoid.
However, after that, the blatant disregard from my husband and mother-in-law became even more apparent. Vincent, I want to talk about our finances this month. Even when I try to initiate a conversation, my husband would ignore me. Thinking that maybe he didn't hear me, I raised my voice, but he just stood up and went to his room. My mother-in-law did the same, not even attempting to look in my direction. When I called out multiple times, she raised the volume of the TV, drowning out my voice. The TV was so loud that I covered my ears and left the room. I couldn't understand the reason behind all of this. And these days I felt increasingly down. Nonetheless, I continued to do household chores like laundry, cleaning, and cooking. I believed that if I remained silent, they would eventually start talking to me properly. But 1 year had passed since Vincent and I moved into my in-laws' house. At that time, I met someone through work who made me question things about Vincent. I wanted to ask my husband about it, but as usual, he didn't respond to me. Hey, can you say something? Anything? You can hear my voice, right? We're all in the same living room. There's no way they can't hear me.
Hey, Mom, can you hear anything?
What?
I can't hear anything.
They both laughed and didn't even look at me. That's when I realized, they just want to hurt me. They're no longer my family. With that thought, I packed my belongings and left my in-laws' house. Shortly after, I filed for divorce. A few months later, I found out that Vincent had completed the necessary procedures, and I returned to being single. I decided to change jobs as well, because I didn't want Vincent to know about my new workplace. After settling into my new life, I moved out of my parents' house and started living on my own. And it was during this time, at my new job, that I had a fateful encounter. I met a man named Mike for the first time at a coffee shop near the office. It all started when I picked up the loose change that fell out of his wallet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Saying that, he treated me the coffee I was buying. At that time, since we hadn't exchanged names or anything, I thought we wouldn't meet again. However, we happened to run into each other at work on another day. Mike and I had several such coincidental encounters, and about 6 months after we first met, we officially started dating. Since I had some time after meeting Mike, I felt comfortable starting a relationship with them. He also trusted me. After a few years of dating, we decided to live together with the intention of getting married. And after a while, we officially registered our marriage. By the time, I had completely forgotten about my ex-husband. However, suddenly, I received a message from Vincent. Since we hadn't been in contact, I had forgotten to block him. The abrupt email contained the following message: Mom passed away, come to the funeral. Why would I, the ex-wife, who divorced many years ago, have to attend my ex-mother-in-law's funeral? I told my current husband Mike about this.
Would you at least go to the wake? After all, she was someone you were involved with in your life, and I'll go, as your husband.
That's what Mike said. But honestly, I didn't want anything to do with them ever again. However, I didn't want to be seen as someone who ignores other people, similar to how they ignored me by not attending my ex-mother-in-law's funeral. Besides, I had Mike by my side. Looking back, I can't say that I completely severed ties with Vincent in my past relationship. I merely ran away. Now, I can put a proper end to that relationship this time. Thinking that, I went to the funeral of my ex-mother-in-law with Mike. When Vincent saw me, he approached me with a smirk on his face, which was inappropriate for a funeral. It had been years since I last saw my ex-husband, and it seemed like his face had gotten a bit rounder, perhaps due to unhealthy habits.
Hey, Iris. So you didn't erase my contact information after all. You still have feelings for me, huh? If you kneel down and apologize right now, you can come back to me, you know?
Seeing that expression, I felt uncomfortable. And in an instant, his face stiffened. My ex-husband was looking at Mike.
Is there anything you want from my wife?
Saying that, Mike pulled my shoulder closer, his gaze cold and piercing. Upon seeing this, Vincent turned pale, trembling uncontrollably.
Mr. President!
Huh? I titled my head in confusion. My ex-husband's face turned pale, as if drained of color.
This is...
Indeed, Mike is the president of the company I work for. However, I didn't know that Vincent had any involvement with Mike. Mike? What's going on? As I asked my husband, he started to explain.
Actually, I didn't tell you anything, but I decided to investigate your ex-husband because I thought something might happen to you. And it turns out, this person was fired from his previous company. Moreover, it was for embezzlement.
I widened my eyes in surprise. The truth was, Vincent wanted to move back to his parents' house because he was being demanded money after his embezzlement was exposed. Unaware of that, we started living with his mother. And sometime later, I heard from an acquaintance that Vincent had been fired from the company. I tried to confront him about it, but he and my mother-in-law continued to ignore me. So I thought it was hopeless and ran away from home.
So, I was picked up by the company I'm currently working for. Mr. Smith here, the president, is a major business partner of our company.
My ex-husband, sweating profusely. Then Mike, who was next to me, continued.
Until now, I've turned a blind eye to what you did to my wife. Well, you and Iris are divorced now, so I try not to bring personal matters into my work. Yes, thank you. So, does that mean our business dealings will continue as it is?
He, who had acted superior towards me, was now trembling like a small animal. Then I looked around. It seemed that Vincent's boss was also in attendance, and he approached us in a flustered manner.
Mr. Smith, to meet you here? Anything wrong?
Wiping his head with a handkerchief, Vincent's boss asked Mike. Mike let out a sigh and replied,
Actually, my wife divorced this man several years ago. And at that time, he and his mother treated her so badly. When he called her to the funeral, saying she should come, I got worried about my wife and came with her. Is that true?
Then he grabbed Vincent's shoulder. Vincent was avoiding eye contact as he was being questioned.
And today, when he noticed my wife, he immediately told her to kneel if she wanted to remarry him. I'm glad I came with my wife. You? How dare you?
Vincent's boss seemed like he was about to attack him.
I have no intention to further humiliating my wife, so we'll leave now. I don't intend to speak ill of the deceased, but she treated my wife horribly, so there's no need for greetings, right? We are truly sorry. I will never let this guy bother you anymore.
My ex-husband was in a daze on the spot. In that state, he wouldn't be able to handle the role of the chief mourner. Well, it has nothing to do with me and Mike anymore. A few days later,
actually, I received a call from that trading company. It seems your ex-husband was fired.
Mike spoke up. Huh, fired?
Yeah. They said he was fired without me even saying anything. They apologized for making you uncomfortable as well. It seems he was embezzling expenses at his current company too. People never change, huh?
I couldn't help but sigh. Being married to someone like that, it's the worst, I said, and Mike laughed.
Well, it's because of that divorce that I was able to meet you.
My husband said with a smile, and I couldn't help but laugh along. In the next spring, a new family member will arrive. I want to build an even happier family with my kind husband and look forward to the birth of our child.